Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation on Alchemist's approach to successful patent prep and prosecution. I'm Gail Martin, Marketing Associate at ReedTech, and I wanted to cover a few housekeeping things before we get started. All lines have been muted. Please feel free to submit questions during the conference by using the chat feature and sending the question to host. If you have difficulty hearing the audio over your computer, try dialing in to the conference. Without further ado, I would like to introduce today's panel members. McLoughlin. Megan is the Product Director for PatentAdvisor, a suite of patent prosecution management tools. Previously, she worked as a patent attorney at the law firm of Nutter, McClennen, and Fish, primarily drafting and prosecuting patent applications. She is joined by Dave Stitzel. Dave is an IP solutions consultant with LexisNexis IP. Prior to joining LexisNexis, Dave has extensive experience drafting and prosecuting patent applications and has also been a patent examiner with the USPTO, as well as working as a research chemist. We are glad to have Dave and Megan with us. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. Today, Dave and I want to share some tips with you for best practices in patent preparation and prosecution, making use of data and technology. So I'll be focusing on the prosecution aspect, and Dave will be focusing on patent preparation. But before we get into specific tips, I want to take some time to talk about why we should even be looking at data in the first place. And when I say data, I'm talking about aggregated USPTO data. So everything from examiner allowance rates to average number of elements and independent claims. Now, I want to emphasize this point. My slides are not moving. Okay. I want to emphasize this point because, unfortunately, even today, I think many attorneys still don't pay attention to this stuff. A lot of attorneys just draft and prosecute patent applications according to the same set of guidelines that they've always followed, without much regard to which technology area their patent is in or who the examiner is that they're working with. But as somebody who spent the past 2 years of my life studying examiner data, I can tell you for a fact there is significant variability at the USPTO. Variability in terms of allowance rates, time to allowance, application of the law, you name it. I actually tend to think of the USPTO as 9,000 or more different patent offices, one for each patent examiner, because it's really that different depending on which examiner you get. Now, to some extent, I know this doesn't come as a surprise. Everybody knows it's easier to get a patent in the mechanical arts, for example, than in business methods. Everybody expects it'll be easier in mechanical arts than in biotechnology. But today I want to talk to you about the variability that you might not expect, talking about variability within technology areas, even between examiners in the same art unit. And I want to give you some tips on how to leverage this information to your benefit. So starting very broadly, let's just look at overall allowance rates across the entire USPTO. So this chart is based on an analysis of 4.7 million applications, all public applications filed between 2000 and 2016. And when I say allowance rate, what I'm talking about here is patented applications over patented plus abandoned applications. So this obviously doesn't include pending applications. So here's the first surprise for me. Looking across the top, you can see that at the technology center level, things aren't that different. So you have the extremes. So the 2800, 74.5% allowance. I think 2800 is semiconductors. And then 1600, 49.6% allowance with biotechnology. But really, zoomed out to this level, there's not that much difference. And it's funny because to me, this is actually where I would expect it. But if you look at these peaks and valleys, it's not till you get into a tech center that you really start to see vast differences. You know, if you look at 3600s, no surprise, there's a huge dip around 3690 business methods. But what's a surprise to me is that right next to it around 3674 is that there's a peak. So let's zoom in just a little bit to the tech center group level. And when I say tech center group, I'm talking about groups of art units as the USPTO arranges them by director. So, in this case, 1710. So this is a real-life example of 2 art units within the same group, 1711, 1718. These are under the management of the same director. You can tell 1711, the technology is maybe a little bit more specific, but not that different. Time to allowance, not that different. But look at the difference in allowance rate. If you get into 1711, you have a 71% chance of getting a patent, whereas if you get stuck in 1718, you only have a 23.6% chance of getting a patent. Now, even at this level, I admit you might be able to explain this away. It's different technology. So let's go even deeper, and let's look at a couple of examiners within the same art unit. Now, obviously, I picked this example for illustration purposes, so this is extreme. A lot of times what you see when you look at a single art unit is examiners around the same level. But I would say for pretty much every art unit I've ever looked at, you are going to find a couple of outliers. And here's the outliers for this art unit. So overall allowance rate for 2172 is 53.8%. But if you end up with Paul Thatcher, you have an 8.6% chance of allowance. Whereas if you end up with examiner Matthew L., you have a 62% chance of allowance. And the other thing that's interesting is these guys started around the exact same time. This is just an estimate based on the image file wrappers, but they probably went through approximately the same training program. They're under the supervision of the same fee, and yet you see these vast differences. So what I'm trying to tell you is who you get as your examiner matters. For effective prosecution, you need to know what you're up against. If you somehow ended up with a Paul and you're used to dealing with Matthews, as you would be, because most people in 2172 are like Matthew L., you need to know that because it completely changes your prosecution strategy. So hopefully I've convinced you that aggregated USPTO statistics are at least something worth looking at. But how can they help you improve your prosecution performance? So I want to spend the rest of my time giving you some insider tips on how to use the data to make the most of your money or your client's money. So Dave will talk more about this, but making strategic choices begins at the drafting phase. All of us endeavor to draft claims that are clear, novel, non-obvious, but there's more to it than that. In particular these days, anyone who works in the realm of computers and software knows they have to be careful in drafting to avoid an Alice rejection. And it turns out, by the way, that whether you overcome such a rejection, in the few cases where people have, appears to come down to just including a few choice words in your claim. A friend of mine, Mark Nowatarski, released a really interesting blog post on this recently. What he did was he actually went through the claim sets for a random sample of 100 cases that had been allowed since Alice, and most of these overcame the rejection through amendment. And he looked at the specific words of the amendment that overcame the rejection, and he found that for most examiners, the only cases that have been allowed since Alice have claims that incorporate specific physical devices, so mobile phone, CPU, whatever. But my advice is don't wait until you're in prosecution. There's technology to predict what's going to happen to your application even before you file it. So use these tools to help you wordsmith to aim for an art unit that doesn't even ever issue Alice rejections in the first place. So there are a lot of tools out there on the market now that can do this, but of course, being the PatentAdvisor product director, I'm going to talk about our tool, which is Pathways. I've seen examples where using Pathways can get you into an art unit where your chances of allowance are improved by as much as 50%. So let me show you what this looks like. So let's say you have an invention for an app, and the point of the app is to help people decide how to invest their money, I should say. So you draft this claim that's basically asking for a business method art unit, a computer-implemented method for displaying information related to financial preferences, method, financial preferences. So if you throw this claim into Pathways, what it's going to tell you, no surprise, is that you have a 70% chance of getting into Tech Center Group 3690, which is business methods and one of the most difficult tech center groups at the USPTO. Its allowance rate overall is 45%. Then you have significantly lower chances of getting into these other groups, most of which don't look really great, with the possible exception of this last one, where you only have a 1% chance of getting into it with that claim language. So maybe you think, okay, this might not be the best move. Maybe you want to look into this Tech Center Group 2680, see if it's even remotely relevant, and if so, try to draft your claim based on that subject matter. Maybe you just think of a different way to characterize the invention. So let's try this. Let's say that you call it an electronic interface on a mobile device for displaying information related to risk preferences. Now put that into pathways, and now the landscape looks completely different. So now you have a 40% chance of getting into 2640, which has almost an 80% allowance rate, 14% chance of getting into 3660, which although still in the 3600s, has a pretty decent allowance rate. So, so if you're successful in making this move to a different art unit, you could probably avoid an Alice rejection altogether. Now, I just made this example up on the fly, so obviously there's differences in scope between the two claims, but you get the idea. The words that you use in your claims and throughout the application to characterize your invention can have a huge influence on where your application goes and therefore what types of rejections it's going to get. So let me look at a less obvious example than just Alice. So say this time the invention is a trash bag. No matter what you put in it, it's not going to smell. It's always going to smell good. So let's call it a trash bag that prevents odor buildup. So here we have an 81% chance of landing in Tech Center Group 37B, 57% allowance rate. Not great. Significantly lower chances of ending up in our units with, decent but not great allowance rates. So let's say, maybe you look into this 1% chance down here for Tech Center Group 28C and you realize, hey, actually this might be relevant to me. So you try to wordsmith your claim so that it fits more within this Tech Center group. And so say now you've changed the claim language and you call it an organic compound configured to repel odors. Well, now the landscape looks a whole lot better already. You have a much higher chance of getting into an art unit with a good allowance rate. So just to summarize here, what I'm trying to say with this is prosecution strategy begins at drafting. A lot of people say, and it's true, you can't pick your examiner, so what good is all this examiner data? But the truth is, you do have some control over which group of examiners your application ends up with. So use that. Now for the next step, I want to fast forward. Say you've got an application on appeal, and the examiner throws it out of appeal. So at some point, maybe you filed your appeal brief, the examiner issues a non-final office action with some new art. Now, one of the most common ways that people actually do use our examiner data is to decide whether or not to appeal in the first place, which makes sense. Are your chances of success on appeal better than your chances of success just with the examiner? But I don't think a lot of people return to the data when their case gets pulled from appeal. And that's important because this is actually, this happens a lot. A significant percentage of cases that go into appeal are pushed back into prosecution. Obviously, it varies how much this happens depending on where you are at the USPTO, but just to give you an example, in Tech Center Group 3690, applications that were appealed are pushed back into prosecution 23% of the time. And in Tech Center Group 2690, applications that are appealed are pushed back into prosecution 19% of the time. So both of these around 20% of the time, but that's pretty significant. And you might be asking, okay, well, why does this matter? It's kind of a win, right? If I get a non-final office action, means the examiner agreed with me. Maybe, but let's look at Examiner Golden. So Examiner Golden has a 12% allowance rate, and this examiner has been there for a while, so it's not like they're new and they just haven't gotten up to speed yet. This person has a significant history, and as you can see, it looks like they only allowed some applications back in 2010 or 2011. Not a whole lot since then. But if you look at cases that have been appealed and made it all the way to the board, of these cases, there were actually 5 applicant wins and 4 situations where the applicants, well, 2 where it was abandoned and 2 where the applicants filed an RCE. Those chances aren't fantastic, but they're certainly better than a 12% allowance rate. So if I've already gone to the trouble of drafting an appeal brief, and then I get pushed back into prosecution, if at all possible, it seems to make sense to go back into appeal. And one really cool thing about this option, and I didn't actually know this when I was practicing, is you can push a case back into appeal without having to pay any additional appeal fees. So if you've already paid, the fee for forwarding the appeal brief to the board, I think that's about $2,000. I think this also applies to the fee for requesting an oral hearing, the fee for requiring notice of appeal. If you've already filed that, if you've already paid those, you don't have to pay those again. It could be 2 or 3 years after you filed your notice of appeal the first time. You still, obviously you'd have to pay any increases in fees that happened over that time, but the fees that you already paid would still apply. So another reason that reinstating appeal may be even more attractive. So as with anything, substance is always key. Obviously, it makes more sense to reinstate the appeal if the new office action is basically a repeat of old rejections, and it may not make so much sense if the new office action is completely new. But don't neglect the numbers on this. So consider the examiner's allowance rate. What are your chances of actually winning with this examiner if you go back into prosecution? Versus if you push it back into the appeal, how have applicants fared before you? Do they usually win at the board? Do they usually lose? And finally, check if reopening prosecution is the habit of the examiner, because maybe that examiner just doesn't want their cases to go to the board. And if so, that might give you some leverage in dealing with them. So along the same lines, I would urge you to seriously consider appeal early in prosecution, maybe even after the first final office action for cases that are important. And the reason that I suggest thinking about this is that, first of all, I don't think many of us do. The automatic response after the first final office action is RCE, maybe a pilot program. But did you know that for many examiners, appeal outcomes are statistically more favorable than RCE outcomes? So going back to the 2 tech center groups we were looking at before, for 3690, 15% of RCE applications had an immediate notice of allowance. So 15% of the time when you file an RCE, you get an immediate notice of allowance. That's not high. But 28% of appealed applications that actually made it all the way to the board were allowed. And in Tech Center Group 2690, 22% of RCE applications had an immediate notice of allowance, still not very high, but even better, 31% that made it to the board were actually allowed. So obviously one way to look at this is you're not even going to appeal a case unless it's valuable. But maybe it is. Maybe your claims are valuable. Maybe this is a case that matters to your client or to you. So for many examiners, it may be cheaper and faster to appeal than to file an RCE, because why waste time building up prosecution history that may come back to haunt you? So as with anything, I would suggest that you look at your specific examiner, your specific art unit to see what the numbers are. So I just wanted to show you one quick example. So let's look at this guy, Mark Regan, from the 2690 group that I was talking about. So his overall allowance rate is only 43%. 50% of applicants, and this is looking at all applications pending, patented, and abandoned. About 50% of applicants have had to file at least one RCE. Of those that did file one RCE, 30.8% had to file 2 or more, and only 7.5% got an immediate allowance after that first RCE. So RCE is not looking super attractive here. Now let's look at this guy's appeal history. So this chart, what it's doing is it's breaking down appeal outcomes by where the case exited the appeal cycle. So here's the outcomes for exiting after pre-appeal review, here's the outcomes exiting the appeal brief, and so forth. So with this guy, you can automatically see that pre-appeal looks like a pretty good option. 5 times there was an immediate allowance. A couple of times it was pulled back into prosecution. And of the one case that actually made it to the board, the applicant won. So not a ton of data to deal with. It looks like this guy may not be appealed too often. But personally, just looking at my chances on RCE, versus my chances on appeal. If this case really mattered, if I wasn't getting anywhere with the examiner, and if I really wanted to avoid excessive prosecution history, better to appeal now than to wait until there's 4 office actions and have to do it then. So my next and last tip, this is one area where I think people actually do look at statistics, especially when a pilot program is new. But I think it's worth mentioning anyway, because in my experience, the statistics on these things can be pretty surprising. So for example, did you know that applications filed under Track 1 actually have a higher allowance rate? We all know that things go faster under Track 1. That's the whole point of the program, and they really do. That is absolutely reflected in the data. But something else is that they actually have a greater chance of being allowed altogether. So Kate Gaudry did a study on this data, USPTO-wide, and she discovered that across the USPTO, there's about a 6% increase in the chances of allowance of Track 1 cases versus non-Track 1 cases. But the differences are actually even more extreme depending on where you look. So going back to our 2 exemplary tech center groups, in 3690, there is a 64% allowance rate for Track 1 and a 45% allowance rate overall. So almost 20% increase for Track 1 applications. In Tech Center Group 2690, we see the exact same things. 87% allowance rate for Track 1, 64% allowance rate overall. So, you might look at this and say, you can explain this away in the same way as the earlier appeal statistics. People only file Track 1 on cases that are good, that are important. And that's probably true to some extent, but I'd suggest it's more. Examiners know that they have to get these cases through. Maybe they even see them as more important. And for an allowance rate jump this significant, again, if you've got claims that you care about, isn't it worth it to have a higher chance of allowance? And you know for a fact it's going to go, prosecution's going to go by more quickly too. So I'll give you another example, the after final consideration pilot program. So with this, my experience has been that the data is all across the board. Some examiners really want to make use of this program. They like it. With others, it's a waste of time. So for example, our examiner A, Galena, she's in 2811. Both of these examiners are in the same art unit. So again, the exact same technology area, same supervisor, but very different prosecution strategies. So Galena has had 7.6% of her applications have had an AFCP 2.0 request. Of those, 21 were allowed, 17 received advisory actions. So that's pretty good. Your chances of getting an allowance with AFCP seem good. Seems like she likes this program. But if you end up with Ori, he also hasn't had too many AFCP requests, but of those, only 6 were allowed and 35 received advisory actions. So again, you need to know who you're working with, which is a pretty good way to summarize my portion of today's presentation. Know which examiner you're working with. There's no replacement for substance in the case, and sometimes the examiner is just going to find that spot-on piece of prior art that completely knocks you out. But before you make any strategic prosecution decision, look at the examiner's numbers, look at the art unit numbers, look at the examiner's supervisor numbers. So that part is it for me. If you have questions, we're going to wait till the end. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Dave so he can talk to you about patent preparation and try to give you some tips there.
Thanks,
so
Megan.
Dave, I'm going to hand the ball over to you.
Sounds good. Let me try sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see. Can you see my screen by any chance?
I see it.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you much. I appreciate that, Megan. And as Megan previously mentioned, her portion was focused on prosecution. My portion is actually pertaining to preparation. So with respect to patent application preparation and drafting, my goal for today is to basically cover some interesting PTAB statistics, then go into some drafting tips, and then follow up with, just a brief mention of how you can leverage patent analytics in your favor. Megan, I was having some technical difficulties, so I don't know if you mentioned at the prelude or the open, but I'm actually a former patent examiner with the USPTO, as well as a practicing patent attorney for a number of years with various law firms. So when I can, I'll try to tie in some practical experience, especially when it comes to drafting, and hopefully that'll provide some insight from not only an examination but also a patent prosecution standpoint. So just getting started off, the PTAB statistics, it's interesting to note that there's been about 6,400 total AIA petitions that have been filed with the PTAB since the AIA went into effect in September 2012. Those petitions include IPRs, inter-parties reviews, as well as post-grant reviews and covered business methods. And what's nice about this diagram on the right, it kind of breaks it out to give you a feel for where the different numbers are coming from with respect to IPRs, PGRs, and CBMs. So despite the fact that there was a slight decline in total AI petitions in 2016 relative to 2015, there was actually a surprising spike in total AIA petitions filed just in January of this year alone. So you can see, 2015, 1737 IPRs, 2016, 1565, and then surprisingly, just in January alone of this year, there's already up to 685 IPRs and 11 PGRs. This is a nice graph outlining the various spikes in CBMs and IPRs since 2012. And then, of course, you can see here kind of a bar graph of the IPR filings as well as CBM and PGR filings. So this is a nice breakdown of the total number of AI petitions filed based on technology. So you can see, for different, attorneys with different specialties, so to speak, with respect to electrical, mechanical, chemical, biotech, and design. You can see where those petitions are predominantly coming from. No surprise, there's a lot dealing with electrical and computer. And then, again, with respect to technology, this chart breaks down the percentage of instituted petitions of all decisions on petition by technology. So it's interesting to see all the claims that actually were instituted on petition. So surprisingly, the PTAB invalidates at least one claim in over 95% of the patents that it reviews, which speaks to the patent quality header here. It's not as common as one might think. It's pretty eye-opening. You can look and see how the PTAB has found claims as being unpatentable based on the different types of technology. Obviously, those are much greater numbers than a patent attorney or the patent attorney as a client would hope to see if you're the one trying to institute your patent and your what was thought to be patentable claims. So again, there's a lot of pressures on patent attorneys, as I know a number of members in the audience would recognize. With the first inventor to file under the AIA, there's definitely increased pressures on patent practitioners to improve patent application drafting quality, as well as decreased drafting times to avoid filing delays and malpractice claims. And then, of course, with the pre-issuance submissions, post-grant reviews, and IPRs under the AIA, there's definitely an emphasis on drafting high-quality patent applications, not only for purposes of patentability, but also validity and enforceability as well. So surprisingly enough, far too many group art units have allowance rates under 5%, and some as low as 1%. So that kind of speaks to a couple of things. One, you want to definitely have a tight application upon filing, but just as important is you want to make sure that you're prosecuting your application to the best as your ability, and PatentAdvisor definitely helps out in that regard, as Megan just demonstrated. So with respect to mechanisms gauging patent quality, you'll see here USPTO search tools, East and West. Those are search tools that patent examiners use when conducting prior art searches. Having been a patent examiner, I used East and West quite a bit. STIC is an internal search, I guess you'd say, inter-office department where you can submit, you know, structure searches, chemical searches and whatnot, coming from the chemical group art unit. I submitted a number of structure searches to STIC, and they would, you know, basically provide the examiner with search results that the examiner was still required to go through and determine whether or not certain references are more pertinent than others. Then you've got crowdsourced prior art searching, as well as pre-issuance submissions, IPRs, PGRs, as well as ex parte examination, and of course federal litigation. So you know, there's a number of things that you want to try to consider when trying to draft an application to the best of your ability, a number of which are listed here. So you want to try to find and identify appropriate language with respect to the terms of art specific to certain industries, and as well as particular client patent portfolios. You know, certain times you'll have clients that would prefer to include their own glossaries within the specification. There's a mixed bag on that, but we definitely provide that ability to, you know, incorporate, you know, client defined terms with our thesaurus and check terms features within LexisNexis PatentAdvisor. And then this is also a nice feature for you know, maybe patent attorneys just getting caught up to speed and just starting their practice. If they want to become quickly familiarized with language integral to a specific technology that they may not be all that familiar with, as well as technologies that have rapidly evolving terms of art. So again, LexisNexis Patent Optimizer has a couple features that can help in that regard. So obviously when drafting a patent application, especially focusing on the claims, you definitely want to avoid potentially problematic claim terms and phrases, whether it be vague and indefinite, you know, anything impacting claim breadth or scope. We again offer a feature in Patent Optimizer that does exactly that. So when it comes to choosing the right language, terms, phrases, and part expressions, you want to definitely ensure, you know, in a patent family that you're remaining consistent throughout those internal documents. So, you know, if you're working on a continuation in part or divisional, it's nice to be able to quickly compare documents within that patent family to make sure that you are in fact remaining consistent, especially when it comes to drawings, claim language, and terms within the spec. And then, of course, you know, you're going to want to conduct due diligence to obtain post-information or post-issuance activity status updates on any patent documents of interest, especially when it comes to, you know, opinion writing, as well as pre-litigation and litigation analyses. So moving on, as I mentioned, we do offer a number of features within Patent Optimizer that address a number of these goals when it comes to patent application drafting and preparation. The first of which I'd like to talk about is our thesaurus feature. So when it comes to choosing your words wisely, the thesaurus actually enables you to highlight a term from your patent document and search a plethora of popular online thesauri for alternative terminology. And that search would also include our proprietary LexisNexis patent thesaurus. So here you can see on the right, we've got a search term for phone. This tool is really beneficial because, you know, when patent attorneys are being their own lexicographers and they're coming up with certain, you know, claim terms to describe certain aspects of their invention, when you're conducting a prior art search, you obviously want to make sure that you're being comprehensive and not missing relevant prior art just because someone was being creative on the drafting side. So you can see here, and the same goes for examination. I mean, patent examiners are going to try to come up with alternative terminology that may be used interchangeably within the art that they're examining. So here, for example, phone, who would have thought that, for example, like mobile terminal would be a, you know, an interchangeable term that's used alternatively in the art to describe, you know, a phone. There's a number of other ones in here that are kind of interesting as well. Network-enabled phone, you know, just different things that a terminal, you know, if you're searching for quote-unquote phone, you're not going to necessarily search a terminal, but that is recognized in the art as being, you know, used interchangeably with phone. So that's pretty eye-opening. It definitely provides the patent practitioner with a lot of ammunition to you know, conduct searches outside of what they may have looked for originally. So again, you know, you can identify related and alternative terminology for claims, phrases, and part expressions within your document. One nice thing about the thesaurus feature, for ease of drafting and saving time and efficiency, we do provide a global replacement capability. While I may not explicitly mention that throughout the rest of the slides, just know that we do offer that and a number of these other features as well. So again, expanding your prior art searches with alternative terms. And then this is also a really nice tool for supporting Markman hearing claim construction arguments. So, you know, if it's known in the art that certain terms are referred to in a certain way, you can leverage that to your advantage. So again, choosing your words wisely. Check terms and mark terms are a feature within Patent Optimizer that enable you to identify prior usage of those terms in your application to those in claims of other patents, as referenced by our Matthew Bender Attorney's Dictionary of Patent Claims Treatise. And then you can also, and that would be here under the prior usage, you can also select a term in your underlying source patent document to see how, you know, maybe patent cases where a court or a litigant has discussed the meaning of that exact term or phrase, as mentioned in maybe federal case law as well as administrative rulings through the PTAB and former BPAI decisions. And then, of course, you can also use this to identify broader, narrower, and related alternative terms using our LexisNexis proprietary thesaurus, as well as the Matthew Bender AD PC, as well as the Elsevier's Copendix for engineering thesaurus. That's nice for if you have you know, part expressions. So the definitions aspect, it didn't happen to be highlighted here. Basically, you just scroll through this list of terms that are highlighted from your application, and you can select one that does have definitions. And what that would provide is identify terms and phrases that could be construed as functional, vague and indefinite, impacting claim breadth and scope, or considered offensive based on a series of proprietary profanity dictionaries. So identifying and correcting improper measurement conversions. You know, as a patent attorney and as an examiner, you're always cognizant of making sure you have proper measurement conversions. Sometimes if you're going national stage from a PCT application, you'll be going from metric to English. You want to make sure that your conversions are right and your office action response. You can run your office action response before filing with this tool. So it's not only a drafting tool, but you can also use it for, you know, checking documents that you would be filing with the patent office during prosecution as well. But the nice thing about this aspect, it flags inaccurate user-entered conversions. It'll notify you of such. Here, you know, I typed in 3.54 in the spec. It noticed that it was an error. It's making a suggestion, and you can make that global replacement if you wish, or you can go through the application and check different flags. I do want to mention that we have over 100 preloaded conversions for the measurements that we check, everything from acceleration, area density, all the way to temperature, volume, and weight. And if there is, you know, particular measurement conversion that you do regularly for one of your clients, we do offer the ability for the user to actually create their own user-defined measurement conversions. Just just know with the caveat that the tool will go off of that. So you want to make extra certain that any user-defined measurement conversions that you place in that user-defined field is 110% accurate. So moving on, preparation tip 3, checking part number and label accuracy and consistency. Having drafted a number of mechanical applications, it's not uncommon, and I'm sure mechanical attorneys out there in the audience would be able to relate to this, but it's not uncommon when you're drafting an application that you would, insert a new part number during your drafting. And, quite honestly, it gets frustrating when you have to go back and renumber all of your part numbers because all of a sudden you added a new feature and now all your numbers are not jiving with what they should be. So this is a really nice feature where you can actually you can make global replacements of part numbers quickly and efficiently. And another thing too about this feature is that it will notify you if you have multiple part numbers associated with a specific part. So inevitably, no matter how careful you are when you're drafting your application, you're going to more than likely have an instance or two where maybe more if it's late at night or on the weekends when you're drafting and you're exhausted, but there's going to be situations where you may have a number of part numbers or a number of instances in which a number of different part numbers are associated with the same part. This will flag those here in red, as you can see. And not only that, but you can actually quickly link out to the figures, and it'll show you on the figure where that part number is located. So it cuts down on complex, trying to track down which part number it is in a complex figure. If you click on 30, it's going to take you right to that, right to the relevant figure. So again, just as an overview or summary, I guess you would say, this checks the accuracy and consistency of part numbers and labels within the drawings and spec. It'll identify anomalies. You can highlight and link out, and it'll actually take you not only to the specification but also the drawing. You can easily navigate. You just continue to hit the number, and it'll navigate through the entire document. Then, of course, you can auto-insert part numbers and labels not only into to the drawings, but for applications that maybe you're filing a PCT application and you want to have those part numbers and labels within the abstract and the description, not only the description but also the claims, for example. You can easily auto-insert those with accuracy. So it definitely speeds up the preparation process as well as ensure quality and efficiency. So moving on with respect to preparation tip number 4, you want to identify and rectify claim anomalies ideally before you file the application for obvious reasons. And this feature in PatentAdvisor enables you to do exactly that. So what you can do with the check claims is you can identify claim anomalies such as examples of lack of the antecedent basis, improper dependencies, improper multiple dependencies, improper status identifiers if you're running your response through the tool before filing, missing claims, numbering errors, and missing periods. These are just a few. I took an application, intentionally inserted some errors into the claim so we could showcase what this tool can actually do for your preparation endeavors. So again, it can identify terms and phrases exclusive to the claims, specification, and drawing. So, say for example, there's a claim element that's crucial to the invention, but lo and behold, when you run this tool, you realize that you don't have explicit written support in the spec. It's a good time to go back and amend the specification prior to filing to make sure you do have that written support. And the same holds true for say, for example, one of the crucial features with respect to your client's invention is described in the spec, but lo and behold, when you run it through, you realize that that particular feature is not included in a claim. At that point, you may want to go ahead and add a dependent claim, for example, to cover that embodiment or that feature. And again, it goes without saying, you can click on certain claim elements or elements within the spec, and it'll take you out to the abstract description part as well as the claim. So moving on with respect to preparation tip number 5, you definitely want to ensure consistency amongst the family members, as I mentioned earlier. You can do exactly that by using our Compare Docs feature within LexisNexis Patent Optimizer. That enables you to analyze specifications, claims, drawings, and citations of up to 6 patent documents simultaneously to quickly identify key differences between said documents. So it's a very nice tool. I mean, it could take hours to try to compare, 6 documents side by side. You'd have to read them, compare them side by side. This tool takes a ton of time out of your, preparation endeavors by illustrating that quickly and efficiently. So you can identify unclaimed subject matter with respect to, patent documents within a family, as well as detect new and deleted subject matter appearing in the claims, specs, drawings across those related patent documents. And then obviously you want to do so to ensure consistency amongst the family members, that you're being consistent in how you're describing certain elements within the family. And of course you can use this, in an offensive manner too. So you can see how maybe, if there's a litigation underway or potentially underway and you're wanting to construe certain terms within the claims, you can look to see how those terms were described in related applications, and I will get to this later, but also how those terms were, referenced during prosecution with respect to, intrinsic evidence within the record, and maybe being able to use that sort of, insight for prosecution history estoppel. So moving on to preparation tip 6, obviously you want to conduct due diligence. For example, when you're, conducting clearance searches or freedom to operate analyses, why be concerned about a patent if it's not even in force due to, for example, being expired for failure to pay maintenance fees. So with the nice thing about the check references feature, one of the nice things is we provide a post-issuance activity status report. That's down here at the bottom, an example of that where, it'll provide information pertaining to notices of litigation, the legal status, I should say, as well as requests for re-exam, expirations, extensions, withdrawals, reissues, re-exam certificates, certificates of correction, so on. And it's just something that I would highly recommend doing, before doing any sort of analysis like that. Moving on, the check references also has a phenomenal feature that resonates extremely well with paralegals, and that is our auto-generated and pre-populated IDS. So what this feature does is will enable the patent attorney and or the paralegal to essentially take cited references, whether it's domestic and foreign, or even NPL literature that's cited within your source document or potentially in an Excel spreadsheet, and you can easily pre-populate an IDS form with the proper citations. And, having been an examiner, there are instances in which you have to deny consideration of a reference due to, ambiguities with respect to the citation itself. This is a nice way to ensure from the applicant's perspective that those references are in fact considered, upon the first time of submission. So from a practice standpoint, it definitely helps make sure that you don't get those stricken through 1449s where references weren't considered by the examiner. So moving on to preparation tip number 8, essentially with our summary report, it basically takes a lot of the features I discussed earlier and significantly reduces drafting and review times for the associate and the partner, and it definitely improves patent application quality, because a lot of the things that I mentioned earlier as far as considerations when attempting to draft, a super tight patent application, those will be highlighted in your summary report. So essentially you can look at it as just a detailed report that covers a lot of things we discussed earlier. And at the end of the day, it enables the patent practitioner to create, more defensible patent applications with improved efficiency, and, it definitely reduces drafting and review times. and with the goal of improving patent application quality for not only trying to place the application in condition for allowance, but also ensuring that it's enforceable after you get the granted patent. So moving on to the patent analytics, wisdom in a box. Basically, this next portion of my presentation is going to focus on leveraging patent analytics to gain critical insights for leveraging for your clients and to obtain better outcomes. So, don't get left behind, sort of thing. There's a lot of companies and a lot of law firms that are already doing this, and the reason being is that you can quickly obtain critical insights from large aggregates of data that would normally take an individual months, if not years, to acquire based on already having a lot of experience in that particular industry or that particular technology. So again, you can process large aggregates of data while looking at multiple documents across entire patent portfolios, and you can do so and leverage those insights gleaned from the patent analytics to gain a better understanding of how to proceed when you're trying to strategize for your client to achieve those better outcomes. And then again, you can leverage those patent analytics to identify strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, for example, in a competitor patent family that might be subject to exploitation. And then, of course, you can use this to prevail in claim construction, Markman hearings, based on the intrinsic as well as extrinsic evidence provided through these analytic tools. So, for example, preparation tip number 9, leveraging the patent analytics to uncover critical insights. When you click on our analytics feature and Patent Optimizer, essentially what that will do is it'll launch a window, and you can see here that it populates a number of what I refer to as pre-filters, and you can take an entire list of patent documents of interest, and you can organize your post-filters or your resultant documents based on, for example, people and organizations, whether it's the inventor, assignee, legal rep, or examiner, as well as the class and date. So whether it's the U.S. class, CPC, IPC, or European class, as well as filing date and publication date. If there's, a certain, I guess you would say, priority date, and you're not interested in looking at any reference beyond that date, you can narrow your search accordingly. And then, of course, specification, you can narrow based on parts, terms, phrases, and citations, as well as claim elements, definitions, and thesauri, so you can actually locate acronyms and variants, that are being recognized as alternative terminology throughout a specific industry and patent portfolio. And then, of course, you can take that. So one thing I should mention is, I may not have already, is that when you select certain elements in the top chart, this is a real-time response in the sense that that will then populate the resultant documents in the dialog box below. So that is, in essence, a post-filter dialog box, and then you can then further select and narrow down those results based on the citation, key data points like examination data, claims, abstract images, and visualization. So it's a nice way to take a huge patent portfolio and distill it down into documents of high relevance. And again, you can use this to perform statistical and substantive claim analysis for large patent portfolios, including patentability, FTOs, and validity infringement analyses. You can configure these and customize these spreadsheets and charts to highlight certain weaknesses, for example, within certain patent families. You can generate claim charts, which is great for opinion work. You can narrow those claim charts based on specific elements. So it'll essentially export out to an Excel spreadsheet, which is extremely convenient from a patent practitioner standpoint. And then one of the highlights, and I'll get into it next with the Patent Optimizer for litigators, is that we do provide insight into intrinsic evidence. So that's extremely beneficial when it comes to claim construction and that sort of thing. And then one thing I should mention, and it's unfortunately not highlighted here, but our images are flexible in the sense that you can filter, view, and rotate and zoom onto those patent images for receiving or retrieving drawings for inclusion in the analytics reports. It's just a really nice feature, and it's a quick way to compare, for example, mechanical inventions and try to narrow down ones that are obviously of relevance based on the figures. It's just a really nice feature. So with respect to the term analysis report, obviously when it comes to litigation, you want to construct your arguments based on extrinsic as well as intrinsic evidence. The term analysis report for litigators, it does exactly that. So it emphasizes patent prosecution history, file history data. So essentially, if there are certain terms at issue, you can go through a comprehensive listing of elements that are recited in your spec and claims, as well as drawings. You can select those, and then you can actually link out to instances in which those particular elements were, discussed during, arguments made in prosecution. Maybe claim amendments that were used to try to overcome rejections or place the application condition for allowance. And of course, you can use this to, again, identify strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities that are subject to exploitation within a patent family, as well as potential threats. And then you can also ensure that there are instances in which there are unclaimed subject matter between the related patents and public or published patent applications. You can quickly determine what that is. So if you're looking at it from a defensive standpoint, and then again, you can use it for potentially invalidating asserted patents. So that pretty much wraps it up for my portion. If you have any questions, if anyone has any questions, what we can do is I'll try to figure out how to go back to the panel portion, and I think you can submit those online, and Megan and I will address those in turn.